This episode profiles the life and death of one-time Mexican Mafia member Robert Salas. On December 4th, 2004, Robert Salas died of what was described as natural causes. Before anyone in the law enforcement community could mobilize to investigate the exact cause of death, his body was hastily cremated, which led to widespread speculation from those not in the loop. Did he die of a hot shot, a forced heroin overdose, possibly administered by his Mexican Mafia detractors? Some guess he had AIDS. His cremation is a matter of family privacy, and that's that. In the end, it doesn't take a mental giant to consider how decades of heroin use contributed to his health issues and ultimate departure from this world. The use of heroin by the same people who saturate our streets with this lethal drug of destruction is somewhat ironic. The movie Scarface has a line that talks about getting high on your own supply. The Italian mob had some early hardliners who voiced reservations and resistance to drugs. But greed is a compelling force. The dragon, as we in the Mexican-American gang community well know, is a deadly and unmerciful killer of anyone who consumes it. My homegirl Lola from VNE was once a very beautiful woman. Every guy in the neighborhood coveted this fine female specimen. Once she became a tecata, a heroin addict, her life and her looks was transformed virtually overnight into a caricature from The Walking Dead. Robot was yet another Mexican Mafia example of this tragedy. Robert Salas was born on April 6, 1944. Growing up in the Ramona Gardens housing projects in the Boyle Heights section of East Los Angeles, Robert suffered from polio as a toddler and was eventually cured from this debilitating infectious disease. As a result of this disease, Robert walked with an exaggerated limp and inherited the affectionate nickname Robot. This moniker would remain with him for the duration of his life. Through the years, many of us would call him Robert, Roberto, but Robot from Hazard Grande would become a recognizable name in the gang community and amongst the convict population in California and the federal prison system. From an innocent toddler with polio, Robert Salas transformed into a long-standing member of the Big Hazard gang, to a Mexican Mafia member, a notorious killer and drug dealer with a solid criminal pedigree. Robot had his own pathway to success, and his favorite phrase was, "I don't have time for," you could fill in the blank. Robot did not have time for dead weight, non-productive people, and anything and anyone that interfered with them at business. He was arrested and convicted in the mid-1960s for a Los Angeles armed robbery. His crime partner was a gang member from the Garrity gang named Carlos Pieface Ortega. Processed together, Robot and Pieface arrived from the LA County Jail to the Chino Guidance Center on the same day. Their prison numbers were almost identical. Robot's was A83892, Pieface was A83889. The two crime partners were reunited at San Quentin, and both were recruited into the Mexican Mafia. There are two particular historical incidents that attach themselves readily to Robot. The first took place on February 4th, 1968, when Robot stabbed James Sonny Peña to death on the upper yard. Sonny was from Eloyo Maravilla, who had withheld drug proceeds owed to La M. Robot, a recently made member, is considered to have made his bones with this prison execution. He was also the instigator in another San Quentin incident, covered in another episode entitled The Shoe War, NF versus M, on September 14, 1968. Robot stabbed Manuel Menito Romero, a gang member from Eloyo Maravilla, and San Jose convicted murderer Hector Mad Dog Padilla inside their South Block cells. Both victims survived, and both would become members of the rival Nuestra Familia prison gang. This was the primary incident that kicked off the Shoe War, so named because the chain of events began when Pieface stole Mad Dog's dress shoes and gave them to Robot after he discovered they didn't fit him. When Mad Dog complained, Robot confronted and attacked Mad Dog inside his cell. Robot was an ambitious man who shared most of his visions with his fellow M. Carnales. Robot and I spent countless hours in our adjustment center and B-section cells discussing, planning, and designing criminal activities inside San Quentin while we allowed the flow of prison life to take us wherever we were headed. On April 25, 1972, Robot and I were individually shackled and sat next to each other on the Grey Goose, an affectionate term given to the Department of Corrections transportation bus, and we rode to our next destinations. Robot was headed to Folsom, and I was being transferred to the California Medical Facility in Vacaville to the controversial Lister program. I was the first prison gang member to enter this experimental program, which essentially was supposed to have me on board as a candidate for a lobotomy, the medical removal of the portion of my brain that was responsible for my propensity for violence. Robot needled me all the way, going cuckoo several times, but he did wish me luck when I got off the bus. That was the last time we saw each other until we reunited 3.5 years later on the streets of LA. During this period, the prison grapevine, our communications network, and word of mouth from fellow MM members kept Robot and everyone else up to date on current developments and MM business. Between San Quentin and Folsom, Robot established a reputation for being a dedicated soldier with an enhanced business acumen. Robot was one of the dozens of MA rising stars from the 60s and 70s, an early example of the famous MA rule shared with new recruits by their sponsoring padrinos. The MA comes first, even before your blood family. On the outside, after serving a decade in prison, Robot joined a group of like-minded, kindred spirits, willing to die, but more importantly, willing to kill for La M. Joe Morgan, myself, Elfie Sosa, and Sailor Boy became the core group, unofficially known as the Inner Circle, a term I originated in my discussions with Joe regarding surrounding ourselves with MA members who wanted to take the organization from a prison gang to the next step, organized crime. We would be the ones to spearhead and pioneer the proliferation and inundation of heroin and cocaine distribution in Los Angeles, Southern California, and several Northern California cities on behalf of the Mexican Mafia. With ME members dispersed throughout the state, the process of spreading the ME gospel was really in a state of infancy. When Robot joined us, the program in LA of taking over or replacing established drug dealers had already been launched. As productive triggermen, Sailor, Alfie, and I were the main enforcers. The goal was to insulate Joe, who had the inside connection with Chuy Araujo, our main Mexican heroin and cocaine supplier. Although Joe was not bashful about getting down and dirty, it was in the MS interest to have Joe hidden in an ivory tower. We were determined to insulate Joe to the max. Robot was expected to perform alongside Sailor, Alfie, and I because he too was a mover and shaker, a natural leader, violent, great business mind, front line type of dude, and the inner circle guys welcomed him on board with open arms. This was sometime in August of 1975. Yes, I can remember friggin' details of that life, but can hardly remember the childhood memories that should have been more important. Make no mistake about it, Robot was a pretty boy and a ladies' man. Ruggedly handsome, he was constantly surrounded by beautiful women, and he was a smooth operator. He dressed well, drove the nicest cars, was well-spoken, and preferred dealing with attorneys, businessmen, and people who did not attract law enforcement attention. Robot was so pretty, I even gave him the unflattering code name of Natalie Wood, a gorgeous dark-haired actress from the 50s and 60s. I frequently used this code name when talking on the phone with him to throw off the feds and anyone listening in on a wiretap. He didn't like it, but it worked for covert purposes, and I had a great time getting back at him for his cuckoo remarks back on that prison bus. One day, Sailor and I saw a ghost. We detected what we perceived as hesitancy in Robot. I invited him to accompany us on a hit assignment in a Los Angeles suburb in the San Gabriel Valley. Sailor and I wondered if Robot would try to talk his way out of it. He did not. Our target was a man by the name of Johnny Ray, not his true name, who was on our laundry list of individuals earmarked for execution. Johnny was special because he was a target of Chuy Araujo's, our cartel supplier, and we enjoyed doing small favors for our connection. It kept him happy, and we were kept supplied with no logistical issues. Sailor and I had already decided if Robot protested, resisted, balked, or otherwise messed up this assignment, we would take him out at some point after getting away from the crime scene. The storyline I gave to Robot went like this. Because Johnny knew who I was, I would be sitting this one out and would be the driver, while Sailor and Ro, that was another name I called him, short for Robot, they would be the designated hitters. They returned in short time and Sailor winked as they got into the car. Robot was solid. The job was successfully completed, and on this rare occasion I was happy to be the getaway driver and glad, for Robot's sake, we had mistakenly prejudged him. Like I said, we saw something that wasn't there. We saw a ghost. One thing is for certain. If the fellas ever suspect someone was slipping, the Special K test was always administered. If you passed it, it was all about no harm, no foul. If you didn't, you were sent to Brazil. We hastily drove away from the crime scene area without breaking any speed limits and moved on to other Mexican Mafia endeavors. Then there was the time Dangerous Dan lined up a rip-off caper in West LA. 10 barrels of bennies would be the jackpot at the end of the day. 5 of us were in a motel room. Robot, Willie Bobo from Redondo, Huito from Eloyo Maravilla, Dangerous Dan from the Avenues, and I, all Mexican Mafia members, armed and dangerous. So Robot is arguing with Huito about how to divide the drugs. I remember shaking my head and thinking, we don't even have the merchandise in our hands yet, and they're already cashing the check and dividing the spoils. Then things got heated. Huito said something to Robot about you're no longer in Folsom trying to run things, and Robot fired something back. Suddenly, Huito was reaching for his shoulder holster and the .357 I had just given him the previous day. Robot is going for his own holstered piece, and I jumped right in the middle, both hands up. I reminded them if they made an aggressive move towards each other, they were both dead. An M member cannot lift a hand against a fellow carnal unless sanctioned. It is a clear M rules violation punishable by death. Everyone simmered down and the ripoff took place without a problem. Plus, we didn't need all 5 of us to rip off the 2 targets. I think Bobo, Dangerous Dan, and Robot took center stage, and we all split everything 5 ways, 2 barrels apiece. Because bennies were not a barrio drug favored, we utilized Robot's brother, Ernie Salas, who was then the West Coast president of the Mongols biker gang, to sell off our barrels, and we all had some gas money. And nobody had to get whacked. If you remember the 1968 shoe war story surrounding Robot, then you know that one of his stabbing victims was Manuel Menito Romero, a member of Eloyo Maravilla street gang. After that incident, Menito would become a high-ranking member of the Nuestra Familia prison gang and was instrumental in recruiting several NF members from LA street gangs during a 1.5-year period of peace between the 2 prison rivals. A ceasefire was in effect between 1971 and 1972. Robot's street intel revealed the whereabouts of Menito, who had paroled to his Southern California roots. On May 26, 1976, Menito was shot to death by Robot inside his home. Robot was accompanied by fellow MM members Daniel Spider Arriaga from Eloyo Maravilla, Menito's street homeboy, and Victor Beaver Minjares from Eastside Clover, who were pretty much there as backup. Although the killing was not a money-making endeavor, the Mexican Mafia possesses a long memory when it comes to prison rivalries and mob opponents. It was Robot who revealed the essence of politicking in the Mexican Mafia in its ugliest form. When I was arrested in 1975 with Sailor Boy for 2 gang homicides in Bakersfield, Robot took over the drug operations, and he surrounded himself with every Mexican Mafia heroin user who had rubber-stamped anything Robot desired. When you have the bag, control of the heroin addicts are at your beck and call. The fellas gravitated to Robot like bees on honey. Many sanctioned hits would take place, and most of these were connected to politicking, a clear violation of a Mexican Mafia rule and also punishable by death. But hey, rules are made to be broken, right? The list of fellow members murdered at the behest of Robert Salas and his politicking ways includes the following. On January 22, 1977, Alfred Cuate Jimenez from Eloyo Maravilla and a first wave member was executed in Highland Park by Alfredo Alfie Sosa. Robot ordered the hit after learning Cuate disagreed with how he was handling business on the streets. On February 1, 1977, Gilbert Gil Roybal was executed in his Fresno home by ME members Elfie Sosa and Daniel Choco Montellano. 9 days prior to the murder, Robot successfully lobbied for Gil's hit, arguing he was not taking care of business, a vague accusation which was rubber-stamped by the majority members present. The photograph you are viewing is the Mexican Mafia baptism of Carlote Amador's daughter, taken on January 30th, 1977, where the fellows voted to have 3 fellow members killed. Elfie Sosa would participate in all 3. On February 11th, 1977, Bruno Chavez was stabbed to death in the Glassell Park section of Los Angeles by ME members Elfie Sosa and Raymond Weroshai Shryock for his lack of activity in Mexican Mafia business and for disrespecting Robot. This common narrative always seemed to include members who were not taking care of business and members who either disrespected or disagreed with Robot. Historically speaking, Robot is the first major ME politicker who used heroin like a carrot. There is no one in this photo who was not a heavy heroin user with a monster habit to support. But they had the heroin and the money to do just that and live comfortably. Robot lived long enough to touch on many worlds, including a taste of Hollywood. In this photo, he is shown with actor Danny Trejo, who was in the prison system with Robot and very familiar with many of the ME OGs. Although Danny Trejo rubbed elbows with many of the Mexican Mafia heavy hitters, he successfully escaped the trap of street and prison gangs. There but for the grace of God go I, is that popular saying. Some may call him a smart man, but in my opinion, I would say he was very blessed. People like him did not forget where they came from and understand the notion of how someone can hate the sin but love the sinner. During Robot's final years of existence, his status and popularity greatly diminished, and Robot's name was often associated with talk of ME termination. The same politicking he engaged in when he was at the height of his game was again taking place, only now Robot was on the receiving end. His dissenters accused him of conducting business as the Lone Ranger, looking out only for himself and not functioning as a team player. There was talk about Robot not sharing the wealth and totally forsaking his ME brothers. Some complained he thought he was too good for them. Robot was involved with church people during his last years on Earth. Some people said he was using church as a front for his criminal activities. Others said he had 1 foot in and 1 foot out. I can tell you one thing. Anyone who thinks he can play games with God will always bite off more than he or she can chew. So if Robot was shucking and jiving with the Christian folks, who will never judge him, shucking and jiving with the big man upstairs, it is my hope and prayer that Robot did indeed bite off more than he could chew, because that would mean he surrendered his soul to the Lord before he died. It would be great to know that he followed Conejo, Big D, Chispas, Kilroy, Johnny Green Eyes, Pretty Bobby, and other former ME members who turned to Christ into his kingdom.